The comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are of those individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, concordant body, appendant body, Masonic Authority, or craftsmanonline.com.
Hey, welcome back to the Craftsman Online Podcast, the only Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge of New York. We are so proud to get that honor each and every week. I'm your host, Right Worshipful Michael Arce, and you've joined us for an episode on, well, the title of it should kind of maybe send an eerie chill up and down your spine. Children shouldn't play with the dead. Oh man, the conspiracy theorists are going to have fun with this. Actually, I don't know who's going to have more fun with this. The conspiracy theorists, the comments that we're going to get on social media for that title, or our production team who's probably sitting here going, oh, we know how much RC is afraid of scary movies, still sleeps with a nightlight as an adult. As we get ready for our conversation with Brother Russell Dickson on his latest book, if you are a writer or have questions, we are going to be doing our very first listener questions and answers episode on the Craftsman Online Podcast. I do get email from our listeners from time to time. Our email address is podcast@craftsmanonline.com. You can reach out to me and send me any question you have about the podcast, my personal life, maybe why I still sleep with a nightlight. Those are all fair game, and we'll answer them on our upcoming questions and answers episode in October. So fire away those questions. The email address is podcast@craftsmanonline.com. All right. Let's go inside the mind of Brother Russell Dickson to explore his captivating horror story, Children Shouldn't Play with the Dead. Now, little background on Brother Russell. He has been writing for the Craftsman Online blog for a few years now. He's a proud member of St. Patrick's Lodge No. 4 in Johnstown, New York, and we're honored to have him on here to talk about the first book in his series that takes place in a small upstate town in Gloversville, New York. Welcome to the Craftsman Online Podcast, Brother Russell.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me on. I've been really looking forward to coming on and speaking to you and seeing you, I think, for the first time. Well, not in person, but at least in video. Anyway, I think eventually we'll meet up in the real world.
I think that'll be sooner than later. Yeah, my wife and I were moving back to upstate New York in targeting mid-April before May 1st, 2026. So chances are we're going to run into each other for sure, both being upstate New Yorkers and men and Masons. Let's start with your book. And speaking of upstate New York, this is what caught my attention. It takes place, it's a fictional story that takes place in a real place, which is Gloversville, New York.
I grew up in Mahopac, New York. It was very similar to Johnstown. There was a lot of apple orchards and farms, and it was like a kind of a nice country setting. And then sort of after 9/11, you had urban sprawl, and it kind of, the area got overpopulated. And I went to college at University of Albany, and that's when I really got to know this area, upstate New York, the Capital Region, Mohawk Valley. And I just really liked it up here.
Yeah, it's interesting when you pick up a book and you're like, wait a second, I recognize this place. And I didn't have to use my imagination to create the picture of Gloversville, New York into my head. I've been there before. But as we get into your book, Children Shouldn't Play with the Dead, when you talk about this story and where it's taking place, I kind of got the Stephen King vibes a little early in your book, where he paints like these picturesque, like sleepy, nice little towns where nothing bad ever happens, and kids riding down the street on their bikes and, playing outside and all those good things. When you talk about some of your childhood was coming into this book, where did you get the inspiration for this story?
So I'm a big fan of Stephen King and Dean Koontz, and I was an avid reader as a child, and a lot of it comes from my surroundings, and Gloversville and Johnstown in particular has very interesting history that a lot of people don't really realize. That goes all the way back to, I'd say, probably the 1600s, where Fonda is a nearby town. Auriesville Shrine was founded on property where some Jesuit priests were murdered by Mohawk Indians back in the 1600s. So, and there was a lot of some battles of the Revolutionary War that took place in Johnstown. I believe the last battle of the Revolutionary War took place there. There was a lot of bloody skirmishes. At one point, the Mohawks come through the town, like murdered every resident at one time. And Gloversville, it had this proud long history as being the leading glove manufacturer in the world, the Twin Cities, and it was like the place to be. Like the 1800s and 1900s, Gloversville was booming. They theaters, they had their own opera house, they had their own museums. I mean, it was a real vibrant town and founded by a lot of these like big names of the city, like Nathan Latour, and there actually was a Potter family that was here, Potter. My book is Podder. There actually was a Potter family. They were very influential in the leather industry. And I just thought it was fascinating how all of a sudden this city kind of just crumbled, I guess, because of new environmental laws in the 90s and because of competition overseas. It just kind of killed the leather industry here. And so this once proud town kind of just wilted, and now you go through a lot of neighborhoods, it's just abandoned factories. And so that's kind of inspired my imagination about what this city must have been like, what some of the characters in this city must have been like. And some of the folklore actually came from downstate. I introduced a serial killer called the Leatherman in this story. The Leatherman was this wandering kind of vagrant who wandered around the tri-state area, Connecticut, slept in caves, and people fed him and they gave him work and let him sleep in his barn. And he was this guy, he was clad in leather, who just wandered around this area. And they say he had a broken heart and he kind of just was wandering, was his way of dealing with his broken heart.
I'm sitting here going, where does a guy get a story of a kid who's hanging out with his friends in the summer, riding bikes, having fun, getting ready for school, and then all of a sudden they find this zombie creature kid thing? Was this a dream? Was this like a story that you heard as a kid around the campfire? Like, where did this come from?
The story I almost put it away and never bought it out again, which I'm glad that I did. If it wasn't for Most Worshipful Stephen Adam Rubin and Brothers of St. Patrick's and my good friend brother Paul at St. Pat's, I probably wouldn't have published the book. I had actually started on it about 10 years ago. I don't want to bring us all down in the story, but my father kind of passed away 10 years ago when I was about to publish it, and he was a big influence on my writing. He just loved everything I did, and we had a table lodge at St. Pat's, and Most Worshipful has come to the St. Pat's a few times, and we just got talking about it. And I told him that I haven't written in a very long time, and that's when he suggested that I write for Craftsman. So that's kind of got me back into it again. And I started thinking, well, I have these old stories. Maybe I should look into doing them again. So then I started showing them to some of the brothers at St. Pat's, and some of the guys were like, this is a really good story. You should do something with it. So it's really the inspiration for the story itself came from, there's a few movies that I really love, Stephen King movies, Stephen King books. So in The River's Edge, one of the friends murders his girlfriend, and instead of running or hiding the body, he just leaves it laying on the river's edge, and he brings all his friends to come see this body, you know what I mean? And Stand By Me, it's a bunch of kids that, as we all know from the story, they decide to have like a hike camping trip to go see a dead body in the woods, And then there was also a movie that was called Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things, which was like a 1960s horror movie, which was about a bunch of kind of hippies experimental black magic that go onto this island and they start messing around with black magic and accidentally wake up all the dead people on the island, all these zombies. And that's kind of loosely where it came from.
A lot of that spirit is captured in this story. We're catching up with Brother Russell Dickson. He's the author of Children Shouldn't Play with the Dead. If you're looking for it, it's on Amazon, like everything these days. So you can start your search there, or just look for in the show notes. We'll make sure to have the link to get right to it. Children Shouldn't Play with the Dead by Brother Russell Dickson. Russell, I wanted to get to that point. You started opening up on it, and the movies and the things that you drew the inspiration from, there were some common themes there. There's a lot about like coming to age and like the growing pain, that teenage angst. And early in your book, like I found myself like really connecting with Johnny, who's the main character. What do they call him? Stilts? That was his nickname.
Stilts, yeah, that was actually my nickname when I was a kid.
Well, and that was back when kids had cool nicknames that your friends gave you. It wasn't, something that you just decided to call yourself. It's what everybody else gave you. I got this book in January. I read it on the train ride from Washington, D.C., where I live now, to New York City. And then I was like, okay, we got to book Russell and we got to get him close to October. So this is a great Halloween story if you're into that. The characters, you kind of, molded Johnny around yourself. But Danny is like the kid that everybody knew somebody like this kid in school. He probably went on, if the story continued into high school, there's no doubt that he was probably a kid that smoked cigarettes and was like drag racing his car in the parking lot. Tell us about Danny Prodder, this cool, tough rebel kid. Who is he based on?
So, like I said, a lot of the characters were based off of me and my childhood friends and my recollection of them. My father always warned me to not hang out with him. My father said he had a stack of juvie cards because he was in and out of. My mom used to call it the bad boys home, That was always her threat. If you misbehave, she's going to put us in the bad boys home, But see, I was in special education when I was a kid. I was kind of put in special classes, small classrooms, small buses. I was kind of alienated from a lot of the other kids. So to kids that were in special ed, he was kind of like a Robin Hood figure to us. And we almost kind of looked up to him because he just didn't care, what I mean? And even the kids in the mainstream classes were afraid of him because he just did what he wanted,
He was badass, yeah.
And he's kind of not even all one person, but there was a few characters in my neighborhood in the 80s. Like my brother read his story and he said it gave him flashbacks that he actually could picture who the kids were, telling their characters were modeled after because he grew up in the same area.
Same, dude. Same. I had the same experience. Yeah.
So I really wanted to capture that Generation X experience, what we were up to when our parents weren't looking, what were we doing? We didn't have TV or anything. We wandered in the woods. We explored empty houses. We hung out with kids that we shouldn't have hung out with, And
we played with zombies and poked them in a box.
So like the Johnny Stills character, he's just kind of a regular kid, but his sort of tragic flaw is he's a people pleaser and he just wants people to like him. He wants the things that all of us wanted when we were kids. We wanted to have a girlfriend. We wanted to be popular. We just, Johnny Stills just wanted people to like him. So because of this need to be liked, he was often drawn into these worlds with kids that maybe he shouldn't have hung out with, like Danny Potter. And
when you get into the characters, and each one of them are very well defined, like Danny and all of his friends, right? But then the parents, they kind of come off as like any parent that would have been on like an 80s sitcom that we would have watched, like Growing Pains or like any of those shows, right? Like they just were background noise to the kids. They were basically just police, like be home at this time, make sure your room's clean, do this, do that. And so this, small town story, it's going great. And then, as you said, like the kids go do what kids do. It's like an abandoned camp. Is that where they?
Yeah, Camp Henry is called, and that's actually modeled after. I grew up in Mahopac, New York, on Lake Secor, and on the other side of Lake Secor, there actually was an abandoned summer camp called Camp Henry.
That must have been so creepy to walk around in. Oh my!
It's creepy and it was fun. That's part of like that age. Like the characters of the book is. Like, it's scary, but you still want to do it. You know what I mean? That's kind of how Stilts was. Like, he was scared of Danny, and he was scared of this creature, but he still had to do it because just that part of you,
Yeah, it's funny when you talk about this because I think of my son. Here's a kid that, he rode his bike around the neighborhood a little bit, hangs out with his friends, but he's not doing what we used to do, which would be like, hey, you want to go check out that abandoned camp? I'll dare you to go over there at midnight, and this is what you got to do to prove that you were there. Like, that's the era of this story. That's the life that we're going up with here. Stilts discovers that Danny has found this zombie that he decides to kind of keep as a pet.
Well, it wasn't a zombie when he found it. It was kind of a mummified kind of kid's corpse that he found in the swamp when he was out catching frogs one day, and he brought it back.
So gross.
And that kind of was another kid that I grew up with who found a dead squirrel that was mummified and he thought it was cool and he kept that in his clubhouse. That's kind of where that connection came from, As in most small towns, most families have been there for many, many years. So Danny Potter and Johnny Still's character are connected by family lineages. You'll find out in my next story, but they're both natives to Gloversville. They're both connected by secret societies, which I explain more in my next book that's going to come out soon. Danny Potter is a descendant of the Potter family that was in a secret society called the Order of the Shadows. Uh, Johnny Still's grandfather, as I talked about in this book, Children Shouldn't Play with the Dead, father was a Freemason. And there's a scene where he's talking to his uncle, and his uncle explains who the Leatherman is, and how his father was a Freemason, and how they kind of vanquished the Leatherman. So that's also going to be in my next story. But so these two characters are tied by family history, and they don't even realize it, So Danny's kind of on the side of evil, this Order of the Shadows, this kind of older fictional secret society, even older than Freemasonry, and Johnny Still's, is from the Freemasons, So he has this kind of innate control over evil and bad things, and he doesn't really realize it. The creature actually is woken up when they do the seance, when a bunch of kids are sitting around in this prop closet in the auditorium of Camp Henry, and they start messing around with it, and there's a couple funny moments in there, all kind of sick funny moments, like where Danny kind of rattles on his head with a stick, says, "Look, nothing upstairs," and they're kind of being disrespectful to it, and they start messing around with the Ouija board, and
Almost start eating one of them at one point. That was the part I'm like, whoa, this is getting kind of gross.
so that was when the creature actually got woken up. The creature's like, all right, or a sort of a spirit had enough of what was going on, and this is kind of disrespect for the dead, which is really what the title means: is respect what you don't understand, respect the dead. Don't play with them, don't mess with them. And that's kind of what this group of kids were doing. They were messing with this poor victim. Caleb was actually a victim of the Leatherman, and you'll learn about him in my next book. They kind of accidentally reanimate Caleb, and Caleb kind of jumps down, and at first he's just kind of angry monster, and he explains how he's smelled nothing about the stench of rot for the last 100 years, and he's kind of cranky, and he's what you would expect an evil little zombie creature to be.
Yeah, as clean and as crisp as the town. When you described like fall, and I'm picturing like the leaves and Halloween with the pumpkin and trick or treat. Underneath all of that is like all the decades old pollution that from all the industry that was happening in town. And here's the price: like this zombie kid, this creature comes around. And for our listener, you're like, wait a second. Okay, I hear where a lot of this story is getting pulled from. I think I've seen this movie before, or I've heard this story before. I'm like, nope, you haven't. There's a really crazy twist at the end where I was like, wait, is there a couple pages that is missing here? Like, I got the digital download. I'm like, did it not put it? Because it quickly jumps from, like, as you pointed out, like zombies, you got the Ouija board, you got the Leatherman witch, or the Leatherman myth. And then you get into like a witch / gypsy thing that gets brought in here. So when you're, as you said, storyboarding, like mapping this out, like you're like, how am I going to wrap this all up? A witch. I'm going to introduce a witch. Like, I'm just curious, like how you pulled this story together.
When I was another story back from my childhood, I grew up on this sleepy little road called Red Brook Road. It was like mostly woods halfway up. And as you'd walk up, I remember walking home on the bus, there was this little shack up in the woods next to this stream, and there was this really old woman that lived in there, and she didn't speak to anybody. She had no power. She had no running water. She used to wash her clothes in the brook. She used to use leaves to blow her nose, and we used to call her the witch. So that's where I got the idea for the witch, this character that lives in the woods. And there was also an abandoned church in the woods when I was a kid that we experienced. So I kind of meshed those two together.
Man, you had the kind of childhood where you were primed to be a horror writer.
And I've just always been obsessed with horror films. I loved horror movies. I loved Stephen King and Dean Koontz and all
Jeez. I mean, who grows up like right across, well, not across the street, but like across town from like an abandoned kids summer school camp area, and also has a witch and an old abandoned church nearby. Like, you must have had a pretty exciting childhood yourself.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun, and then so I'm very much inspired by my surroundings, the people around me. Like a lot of the articles that I wrote for Craftsman were I'm inspired by the brothers of St. Pat's or some of the brothers I met at the Scottish Rite, or so like my surroundings inspire me. So now you take me and then put me into Gloversville, this city kind of with this really cool history going back to colonial times. Even St. Pat's has got a fascinating history. I mean, St. Pat's number 4 existed before America was here. I mean, it was original charter from England, and there's just so much history here. It just fascinates me. And there's this kind of creepy air to certain parts of town, like Gloversville especially, these big abandoned factories and with faded lettering on the side of it and twisted metal. And my idea for Children Should Play with the Dead is I wanted it to be a jumping off point. I wanted to make Gloversville especially and Johnstown, Fonda, sort of my Bangor, Maine, which Bangor, Maine is to Stephen King. I want Gloversville, not to compare myself to Stephen King. I mean, the guy's a brilliant writer, and I hope I could be as well known as him one day. But I wanted Gloversville to be this jumping off point. So this book is really intended to be like the starting point. So there's going to be a lot of other books that are going to come out from this world I created in Gloversville. So you'll see a lot of these characters again in other stories that I'm doing.
So we're catching up with Brother Russell Dickson, and when he's not senior deacon of his lodge, St. Patrick's number 4 in Johnstown, New York, and he's also not providing awesome blog articles for Craftsman Online, his real job, at least the one that pays the bills, he's a newspaper reporter. And I found that really interesting when you came to join us at Craftsman Online, because we had never had anyone who was a journalist before. And the way that you can describe and talk and really paint that picture in your blog writings is it's fantastic. So when I got the copy of the book from you, I was like, oh, I can't wait to read this. And yeah, there's parts of it where I'm like, that was just, so beautiful when you talk about the town and the scenery. I myself have always had the idea to want to write a book about some of the stories in my life, but it always comes down to that. And like, where do you start and how do you do it? And should I go take a community college class? So for someone who's listening to this episode who has a story idea, or maybe someday would like to write their book or story, Brother Russell, what advice do you have for them? Like, where do you start?
First thing is don't let anybody talk you out of it. People are naysayers. People are closed-minded. They think you're not a writer. Don't listen to people. I spent too many years doing that. So when I was a kid, I had dyslexia, and I spent a lot of time in special ed. And the one thing that was very hard for me to do was write. And I remember telling teachers that I wanted to be a writer one day, and I had a few of them just kind of take me by the shoulder and chuckle and say, it's not really for you. It was really a dream of mine. I really wanted to be a writer one day. Like, imagine myself as a foreign correspondent, winning a Pulitzer or something like that. That didn't quite happen, but see, Hollywood kind of threw off what a real writer is. Like in the movies, the writer sits behind the typewriter and the magic happens. They just sit down, they got the old timey metal keys and they're just clicking away on it, and then poof, there's this novel, and it really doesn't work that way, at least not for me and not for any other writers I know, so write what you know, do your research, do the storyboarding that I talked about, write an outline, and start off small. Don't write the great American novel yet. Maybe a lot of local newspapers have guest columns. Maybe that's how I kind of started. I was a guest columnist for the Leader Herald for a long time. I wrote dozens of articles for them. I wrote some for the Schenectady Gazette. They're really open to it. You just call up your local paper and you talk to the editor, ask for the news editor or the op-ed editor, and just say, hey, I have an idea for an op-ed. Would you let me write it for you? And then they'll say, okay, give me 500 words,
Honestly, I think I'll make a local joke here. The most famous person I know from Gloversville, at least in our lifetime, would be Sean McMaster, the DJ that was on WGNA for years. So Children Shouldn't Play with the Dead, it's out now on Amazon. You teased the next book is going to be on the Leatherman character. Do you have a working title for that? And do you have any idea when that will be released?
So the working title is The Curse of the Leatherman. How long it takes to get released is usually up to the publisher. I know when I had the finished product for Children Shouldn't Play with the Dead done, it took about a year from when I handed it to the publisher and then they had the final product, So my book is selling on Amazon and it's also selling on 40 different platforms. And it's also in paperback. Pretty soon it's going to be in 50 different bookstores across the U.S.
Hey, if you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow us on Spotify, or you can get the Craftsman Online podcast on Apple by hitting subscribe. That's how you get our latest episode each and every week. Again, thanks to all of our friends and brothers who continue to show some love and sponsor this show for just $5 a month on Patreon. What you get, ad-free, early access, and the complete back catalog of our subscriber extra episodes. What we get, your support in advancing our mission to connect men with free masonry. I'm Right Worshipful Brother Michael Arce. Until our time together next Monday, let peace and harmony prevail.